Chapter 53. The man who guided me did not speak as we moved along narrow alleys and lanes. Never once did we set foot on the main street, but once, when we heard the watch approaching, he slipped into an alcove. Breathlessly, we waited until they passed. It was then I said, "I need you to take me to the White Stag Tavern." "I was told to bring you to the walls," he said. "Show the place to me, and I'll trouble you no more. And I'll pay you," I said, holding out some pennies. He put out his hand, which in the moonlight showed me he had but 3 fingers. I dropped the coins. For a moment he seemed to weigh the money. "It's not far," he said, and limped away. After passing through a warren of muddy lanes, we came to the head of a dark alley. "There," the man said, pointing. No light came from any building. "Where?" I asked. "That building." He gestured to the head of the alley and a narrow structure 2 stories high. I looked at it again, but when I turned back to thank the man, he'd already gone. All I could hear of him was the foot scraping in the dark. I studied the house he had pointed out. It was the moon that allowed me to make out our sign hanging over the door, which bore an image of a white stag, ghost-like in the faint light. Not only did the building seem on the verge of collapse, it appeared completely deserted. I approached the building and rapped softly upon the stout door. There was no response. Reluctant to leave, I put my ear to the door and listened. I heard a sound within. Emboldened, I knocked again. The door creaked open. I saw no one, but a voice spoke. "Who is it?" "I'm Bear's apprentice," I whispered. "He's been taken." The door shut. I put my ear to the door again. I was sure I heard voices. Perhaps, I thought, they were discussing what to do. The door reopened a bit. "What's your name?" I was asked. "Crispin." "Come," someone said, even as the door swung open, wide enough for me to slip within. I looked around. A small candle provided little light amidst the shadows. The room was not unlike the Green Man's, but smaller, with fewer tables and benches. I could make out 5 men. Their faces were indistinct, partly hidden with cowls, making it clear they did not wish to be recognized. Still, I had a vague sense that at least some of them were those who had gathered in the shoemaker's house earlier in the day. "What brings you here?" I was asked. I was sure it was John Ball who spoke. "Bear has been taken," I said. "By whom?" "The soldiers, the ones who came to your meeting." "Do you know where he is?" "He was brought to the Furnival's palace." "Are you sure?" "I saw him dragged in." "God have mercy on his soul," someone else said. "They'll torture him," said another. "They'll make him give our names." "He doesn't know them." "He won't inform on you." I said, "I'm sure he won't. He's too strong for that. He'd rather die." "Braver and stronger men than Bear succumb to pain," said one of the men. "And he has grown weak, the man I thought was John Ball said. When we met a year ago, he was ready to join us in our brotherhood. Since then, he's altered his mind." I said, "He says things are not ready." "How would a juggler know about such matters?" someone asked. "The man's a spy," John Ball said. "It's his business to know." To hear the revelation was to know that it was true. The only part of my surprise was that I had not thought about it myself. Then John Ball said to me, "Why did you come here?" "I need to help Bear." "You can't," said another. "The palace is too well guarded. Besides, they'll have put him in the dungeons." "Boy," said John Ball, "Bear told me you're Lord Furnival's bastard son. You were more likely the reason our meeting was discovered. Didn't Bear turn away from our brotherhood? How can we be certain of your loyalties? If you had any sense, you would be gone by now." "It was I who warned you before," I said, "and it was Bear who helped you escape." There was some uneasy shifting about by the men. "He's lost his way," John Ball said angrily. "We can't endanger ourselves any further." There were some low, if indistinct, murmurs of assent, and I said, "Can someone at least guide me to the square?" "What do you think you can do?" "I can't abandon Bear," I said. "If it's true who you are, they probably took him as bait," said someone. "For you're doing exactly what they want." "I have to try." One of the men came forward. "I'll bring you close." Chapter 54. We reached the square not long after the church bells rang for matins. As soon as we arrived, the man who had guided me disappeared without a word. I looked over the square. The bright moon revealed a field of empty tables and stalls, deserted by its traitor swarms. All lay in uneasy silence, putting me in mind of the abandoned village where I had first met Bear. But here, at one end of the square, stood the palace of the Furnivals. It was huge and dark, save for 2 windows on the second level. There some dim light glimmered. Opposite, at the other side of the square, the great church rose up in all its majesty, its stained-glass windows glowing faintly like the embers of a smoldering fire. As I stood and listened, I heard the sound of chanting coming from the church. Priests were at their early prayers. Their blended voices rolled across the square like a rising and falling wind. Media vitae in morte sumas, quem quorimeas adiotorum, nisi di doni domino, qui pro peccatis nostris justus tirasias. I made the sign of the cross over my heart, imploring St. Giles to guide and help me as he had done before. Then I turned to the palace where Bear was being held. Even as I wondered if he was alive, I spied some movement by the central doors at the lower level. Shielding myself behind some deserted stalls and tables, I made my way closer to the palace. When I peeked out, I saw two guards standing by the main doors. One of the men was leaning back, his arms were folded over his chest, his head bent down. He gave the impression of being asleep. The other guard was pacing restlessly. I crept closer and studied the building. It was quite clear that there would be no getting past the main door guards. How then could I possibly find a way inside? Then I recalled seeing John Aycliffe on the balcony. Perhaps the second level was not so well guarded. The problem was to get there. I moved along the square so I could examine the far side of the palace building. There, other buildings crowded in, and in the moonlight, what I discovered was that between the palace and the next building there existed only a slight separation. It was hardly more than a crevice, not big enough for a man to squeeze into. But I was still a boy. After waiting until the restless guard moved as far away as he was likely to go, I darted forward and squeezed into the breach I'd found. It was so narrow I went in sideways. It was too dark to see much, but I could feel around. The palace walls were jagged stone. The wall opposite was made of some rough clay or plaster. I put down Bear's sack. If I returned, I could retrieve it. If I didn't return, it wouldn't matter. Barely able to turn about, I was like a kernel of wheat between two stones. I pressed my hands against the opposing walls. Using my fingertips to grasp small edges and bumps, I began to move slowly up. When high enough off the ground, I lifted my legs and pushed my feet against the walls as to gain even more purchase. Straining every bit of the way, I could climb the walls like a spider. Exactly how long it took me to reach the balcony, I don't know. It was higher than the roof of the Stromford church. Even when I reached the level of the balcony, I was not where I needed to be. The balcony jutted out behind the building's front wall, whereas I was lodged against a side wall. Pushing my back hard against the palace stone while my feet pressed against the clay wall, I managed to turn about. Now I was able to wedge myself securely in place even as I freed my hands. Just beneath the balcony, a stone carving of a lion, its jagged mouth agape, protruded. By stretching one arm to the utmost, I was able to reach the beast's lower jaw. Grasping it firmly, I released the pressure in my body from the walls. I swung out, holding to the lion's mouth with one hand, legs dangling high above the ground and the guards below. With my other hand, I stretched up and clutched the balcony itself. Now I was clinging to the balcony with one hand. I moved the other hand up so that now I dangled with two hands. Even as I swung my feet in to gain some purchase, I hauled myself up, pulling and pulling again until I had finally hoisted myself over the balcony railing. To my great relief, no one was there. As far as I could tell, the guards below hadn't seen me. Legs shaking from my effort, I stood on the balcony and gathered my breath. Not daring to waste any time, I hurriedly crept inside through an open balcony door. In doing so, I entered a dim and narrow hall. I neither heard nor saw anything to cause alarm. Only at the farthest end was there some feeble light. I looked about. The area into which I'd come was nothing more than a shallow entryway. I edged forward, pausing to notice doors on either side of the little hall. I set my ear to one of them. When I heard nothing, I pushed it in. In the faint moonlight that came through a high small window, I saw only flags on wooden poles. I turned to the other door, listened, then pushed it open too. Along one wall was a rack of glaives, another wall bore broadswords, a third held some daggers. I took up one of the daggers, then withdrew, shutting the door behind me. I now moved toward the end of the entry hall, leaned forward to peer in, and gasped.